Sheila here with Sirius Telus Moon as the moon applies to Rahu. This is Mercury hour, and Mercury is in the 12th house, 2 degrees Sagittarius. Mars is 27 degrees, almost 28 degrees Scorpio, and the moon is in Pisces applying to Rahu. Jupiter is in the 7th house, 24 degrees, and we are continuing on our journey looking into the Pluto-Neptune synodic cycle. And so I talked about the conjunction which we had in the 1890s, and then leading up to the bisextile in Gladio, that would continue to the sextile in all up to today, basically, as we are growing into the opening square. Now, I want to talk about the 1980s because that was the closing square. So, 1980s. How did that how did that come about? Just talk about 1980s. I'm sorry, 8080s. Now that makes more sense. 8080s. Um, and this was the Victorian era. Okay, so the closing square was the Victorian era. And musically, I can think about Emily Autumn, who was inspired by the Victorian era and sings a lot about that time. And we have long distance passenger train called the Orient Express begins running. So again, transportation. Okay, Pluto Neptune is megalithic boom in technology. So you think about the technology that allowed us the kinetoscope that allowed us to basically enjoy films and filmmaking. It was, going back to the camera obscura of Da Vinci, this one would allow us to enjoy film. Okay, not just static pictures, but motion pictures. And here we have another moving another moving element, but this time it's the Orient Express, linking Paris and Constantinople. Now, leading to the opening square, there is an attempt to create infrastructure from Europe through the Middle East all the way to China, or to reopen the Silk Roads. And so it's poppies all over the place. And by the way, poppies is a is a moon planet, and so is silver. And we saw that the toxic use of that was United States dealing opium to China for silver, and basically um, how both got invaded because China owns most of United States. And this is how, China learned how to deflate the currency to get back its own gold from United States. So silver transmuted to gold. And basically, we can't create an addiction without harming both the solar and lunar qualities, which is confidence, self-trust, expression, personality, sun, and emotional self-trust, psychological well-being, nourishment, food absorption, which is moon, and then we have from the rising sun to the setting sun, corruption. That manifested in, and here's the thing, astrologers use poppies as an offering for moon talismans, and I can see how people see the moon as harvesting souls. Well, this is only the case when we don't honor the feminine, and we don't honor sexual sovereignty, and then basically we harm the water. And then even the moon becomes soul harvesting. Any planet could be looked at from a soul harvesting perspective or from a life giving perspective, including Saturn, which is dedication. But from a soul harvesting, it is death and decay. And those who worship the feeding on the life qualities of Saturn, um, okay, usually have one perspective that without the other perspective could become lower astral, addictive, and that has to do with are is the feminine honored, is the masculine honored, um, whether it's LGBTQ or not. I don't understand so much what's behind the androgynous, because the androgynous agenda seem to create it like A-bombs that create sexual polarity. So this is moving from androgynous to polarity, and this cycle of scientific evolution. So I'm not quite sure why was there desire to create androgynous. I know it's associated with gods like Baphomet that juxtapose polarities, and but I don't quite understand why would one want to engineer androgynous for, like, perhaps because they wanted to have like sovereignty in the way that owning both polarities of the sex. What Rudy calls the hermaphrodites, um, trying to contain both polarity of the sexual experience and the life experience to sustain and survive, kind of not having to depend on polarity to procreate, but then they depend on technology, which is the breeding and the cloning. Um, so again, even that has like a torture ritual frequency, while the way that they try to sustain or clone people, again, it probably was some sort of a lack that caused them that to think that that's kind of like a necessity and invention. Um, this says a couple of millennia old. Like, I really don't know about that too much. Um, But that's something that also coincides with Aries. Aries cycles are 500-year cycles, and China probably works with something as the equivalent of Aries, because it works in half a century cycles. Now, so we had the U.S. Congress 1883 bans Chinese immigrants from entering U.S. for 10 years starting in 18. Okay, it kind of looks like the U.S.-China relations that we see today. South Fork Dam fails after heavy rainfall and floods. The town of Johnston, Pennsylvania, which could even be a false flag, like it could already be intervention or technological intervention in weather. There are many ways to do that. Okay, if you bring beavers to a desert, it begins to forestify. Um, there are just so many ways to interfere in the ecosystem. Um, Killing over 2,000 people. George Eastman introduces Kodak. Number one. So again, something to do with filmmaking. In that case, we have Kodak. There's a Kodak moment, and the camera becomes enormous success. Um, which later in in the actual conjunction we will see that developing into the kinetoscope. Um, so we probably are expecting filming technology. Right now we have the ability to screen and film the human thought becoming more apparent. Now, with scientific revolutions, Neptune Pluto is simply leaking of pre existing science. Okay, because those secret projects, they work on the technology, they use it sometimes, I dare say, for centuries before they ripen into um, being exposed or even leaked to the world. And with Neptune, it makes sense because it's when I tend to missing people, there is a consciousness evolution that has to be, and that's Neptune. And that's Neptune. What happened? Okay. And that is Neptune and Pluto. Okay. Pluto evolution, Neptune, something that what we didn't know that we didn't know. Um, so economic growth and prosperity, um, introduction of skyscrapers, a part of the Gilded Age already, Victorian era in the British Empire, and Belle Epoque in France. Um, yes, situation for women was not the best. Okay, bombing that kills at least 7 police officers in Chicago and 4 civilians during massive protests from a labor rally. Okay, so again we see industrial coming together with workers' revolution, which we're probably expected to see both in the Sextile and in the coming opening square. May Day protests, the origin of modern May Day protests. So the original May Day was blue, was wearing blue, and it was only after the commies that became red. And we cannot say commies without saying R&Rs, okay, so Rothschild and Rockefellers and Rosicrucians. Now, again, I don't know about the blue uniforms, which was the original workers' revolution, and how did that blue become red, um, is something that I, is an education gap that I do have about that, because probably the blue was already linked to something that funded that, and I just don't know why the difference in the colors. Um, Mass transit and telecommunication. Neptune rules waves, so everything that operates on a wave frequency, the speed of light, sound, thermodynamics. Okay, think about Neptune Pluto as the electron Pluto, a wave, okay, or even the photon Pluto, which is the Pluto of the electron. If you think about the atom, okay, as the unit, the core unit, Pluto would go even deeper into the nuclei, and which will give us radiation, and that would probably translate to photoelectric something. Neptune is duality, and so wave would always coincide with a certain sort of duality. I do think that towards the Neptune square Pluto, it seems to be that waves would operate differently, affecting the structure of structures. Okay, the structures of the ontological unit of physics, be it the atom or whatever. And this is where we will have ontological changes which means that the unit of what we're looking at is changing. Okay, I talked about the courtesan, partisan, and indeed Pluto is in my 12th house, where the house where we make scientific contribution, and Saturn that's ruling it is applying to my second house in Aries in the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And I talked about the intelligence, physical, medical, psychological, and cosmological and spiritual aspect of the courtesan Cartesian division that is a result of raping people to do mind control, and how that affected the entire cosmology and sciences, and how we have, with the calling for sexual sovereignty, a change of the ontological unit, and understanding that the ontological unit, that's a human being, is incompatible with both ANOVA but also deep machine learning models that do not support sexual sovereignty. It's probably my greatest contribution in this life to science, and probably my legacy beyond centuries. Um, because this is taking something that was considered a moral debate into showing that as a core issue at the core of foundations of our um, zeitgeist cosmology, and what would be the thing that changes everything in regard to how we perceive and experience the world, both in praxis, applied science, and in philosophical, spiritual, and cosmological. So that is something that probably the biggest contribution that I had made in this life to the everything of everything. Um, And yes, having a midheaven, Mula Nakshatra, Pluto 0 degree, Scorpio, I'm in my Neptune square, and this is basically at my Neptune square that I make this contribution, applying to my Uranus square with Uranus and Sedna conjoining my Chiron. So that contributed to that increased awareness. I do not prescribe a life that would create the biggest scientific contribution in that topic in the world to anyone, but this is indeed, yes, my legacy, and probably it does pinpoint me as one of the greatest thinkers in quite some millennia, by chance. Okay, I didn't mean to. It's just me tending to my own sexual sovereignty that created the fact that the reason I did not have sexual sovereignty had to do with the courtesan Cartesian division that affected literally how we see the world, how policies are made, and so on and so forth. And one woman's journey to sexual sovereignty created probably the biggest uh, scientific legacy in probably several millennia. Safe to say, it will probably take some centuries before that is coming to fruition. Um, but this is indeed a point in time where we can see that topic that comes from both internal questioning or questing, or saying, hey, why is that thing so important to me, into a refinement of how that is basically the one thing that would change literally everything, and probably in the coming decades I will know to predict more about what will be the implication of this scientific discovery, and the implications on humanity. Very likely, I'm not the first that made that contribution, and so it would be interesting to see what other people have been, and they very likely were secluded. So it would be interesting to see what other people have came into that awareness, other than the fact that it was consciously used to oppress and subjugate people intentionally, but that probably is also the antidote and the healing. Um, and how do we create and preserve sexual sovereignty in spirit and matter is something that would lead to uh, the series of also explaining why Nikola Tesla died without us having Tesla energy as Nikola Tesla's energy or free energy. And that has to do with humanity having to align spiritually with those inventions. And this is perhaps where I am that link in that megalithic chain of both the scientific and spiritual endeavor, because this value that I bring to the discourse is the alignment to the application of the sciences in benefit of humanity, thereby having the energies, whether it's of Nikola Tesla and the inventions that we call golden ages, all the way back to the parts in Da Vinci that were benefic to humanity, and even the legacies of wealth families like the Medicis to the Rothschilds, and what would be the thing that would change everything in regards to having a legacy that is kind of like a 12 millennial legacy rather than a couple of centuries legacy, which is not bad, but is also something that people immediately see in a different light. And that is because of the volatility of sexual boundary violation, and it creates very volatile system. And I know that a couple of centuries looks like a very big time, but is a nothing on the fragment of time regarding the opportunities that are opening each and every time Pluto and Neptune have a conversation, and at many other trajectories as well. um, Last living person of the decade, Maria Capuvilla, died in 2006. So we're talking about the 1870s to the 1907. So the 1880s. Um, so settlers tried to claim land during Oklahoma and land rush of 1889. Combined groups of British and Sudanese forces on opposing sides fight during a nationalist uprising against Khedive Tawfiq Pasha. And interestingly enough, we see rising war in Sudan again. White flag. No, wait. Thank you. And we see the rising of uprising in Sudan um, happening now, even with the sextile. So booming economic growth, prosperity in parts of the world, particularly Europe and the Americas, emergence of modern cities. Okay, again, the topic of cities is not just Uranus Gemini, but also Pluto Neptune. Big population, okay, population booming, long-lived corporations, franchise and brands, introduction of skyscrapers, okay, still in the Gilded Age, second industrial revolution. We are in an industrial revolution right now, which is both exciting and challenging. Assassinations. Alexander II of Russia, James A. Garfield, Queen Victoria, Jess James, Lord Frederick Cavendish. Again, both Pluto and Neptune can be mass assassination, which unfortunately we saw with multiple genocides along this century. Now, again, there were always wars, but I think the Pluto Neptune is the mythization of a certain war or genocide, the ideation of war, and the devaluation or the fall from grace. If we see just now with the 2 years of 7th of October, and it's too early to say about Ukraine, but we see with the 7th of October the ideation from the Israeli side of we are finally going to resolve the Gaza question, okay, with the belief and ideation that Hamas would be obliterated and there will be no this and no this and no this, and people considering that the toughest war area in the world. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it can be, but it's also, hey, there is Congo, there is Sudan, there is, and then, of course, the fall from grace with the insinuation of Israeli real estate investor and contractor. Please, I'm recording. Okay. Okay, with Israeli investor and contractor that invested in an area where people were genocided. I think it was in Cyprus, and then was halted. I think even facing litigation and arrest following that investment. Kind of Israel news signaling Israeli investors that their dream of a mansion in Gaza is probably going to not. And I talked about the laser focused and people were promised that they're going to be the next power broker. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't opportunities, however vile, but they run the risk of going algorithms at the best of cases. Because the only regime, whether it's technological, political, even spiritual, when one gets to say, okay, I was not re-elected, and cycle back home, okay, and have some coffee, it's Saturday. De koker is gesloten. um, but the only regime where that happens is anywhere close to representative democracy. And I'm saying representative for a reason. Yitzhak Rabin, for example, was not close enough to being representative prior to his assassination. Doesn't matter what we think about that politically, people did not feel that he represented enough of the people to do the moves that he did. And okay, but then the growing representativeness of Pim Fortuyn in the 2000s also brought to his assassination. Because he was representing more of the people, but the polarity basically became lethal to him. By the way, a female professor that threw a feces cake at him, kind of a brave action to throw a feces cake at the Satanist. I'm sorry, Catholic. She still teaches in same university where the assassin came out of. So again, if she's going to tackle ritual abuse, she doesn't need a feces cake to do that. And the 33 years old assassin that was in favor of animal rights probably should have tackled ritual abuse. Like, I respect people like Lars. Lars talks about the ritual abuse. He talks to the point. And he's fair with that too. So yeah, more things that we can tell about this closing square. Wars, technology, industrialized. Do we see a change of energy? I think not at this time. We're probably still running on oil. But this was a part of the synodic cycle that opened the reliance on oil, I predict. And now we are probably with the I'm sorry, I have to. Nikola Tesla. Birth chart of Nikola Tesla. Trudy would say he was a clone, but indeed, what prevented us from having free energy, it's a B rated, so I don't have all the things. He had Urano Beta per se. We recently had another Urano Beta per se. And the reason I say Beta per se, not Algol, is because Algol is head of Saturn, and Beta per se was demonified. So I think it's fair to call it Beta per se, Medusa Gorgon perhaps, but Algol is basically in Arabic the head of Satan, and demonifying women in that way is why Islamic people still complain about Islamophobia, albeit the beautiful Sufi traditions. By the way, my astrology inspiration or teacher and civil attorney Christopher Warnock works with Algol as his best-selling talisman, and he's working with Sufi tradition. And he is working with Algol to set boundaries. So this is, yes, and she's associated with electricity. So having Nikola Tesla with Uranus conjoining Beta per se is definitely about that energy that we would need to honor sexual sovereignty to have Nikola Tesla's energy in wide use, and that requires for humanity elevation. That doesn't negate the fact that whether he was a clone, whether he raped children, because there are certain contexts to that that we haven't untangled as humanity, and it plays into things that happen in indigenous societies as well, which allowed Genghis Khan to Genghis Khan. Okay, so yes, people can blame the Mongol Empire as much as they want, but to untangle from that is to untangle from child and human trafficking and from feeding the lower astral with living people and animals and so on. Uranus was sextiling Neptune, and Uranus sextile Neptune. Neptune was in Pisces, Pluto in Taurus, and he was born in 1856, which is the aftermath of the closing square, as applying to the conjunction between Pluto Neptune, which would be at the 1871, 56, 71, somebody help me. That would be the Uranus square, the building of the Uranus square for Tesla, for Nikola Tesla. When did he come up with Nikola Tesla? Nikola Tesla. When did he come up with? By the way, another electric engineer was Marc Dutroux, and kind of like if he was not being Epstein, who knows if he wouldn't have a Tesla with that moon on the Mula Nakshatra, and him being electric engineer. So kind of think about the trajectory. If Marc Dutroux was well nourished and not sexually violated, and until he sexually violates the innocent, just think about what he could do. And this is a part of what could have been his life trajectory, and his legacy, and thereby also Belgian and European legacy. But addiction to torturing people led monarchies astray from legacy. In a way, it created decentralization of regimes, but to untangle from child trafficking would mean to be actually sovereign. Okay, when did he discover? Oh, creating earthquakes artificially. That's why he was. And here's the thing: he discovered. I'm not gonna do that synastry right now, but I will do that synastry, because let me talk about. Some of you already know that in my academic studies, there was a person that was looking into earthquake. They woke up with like an equate. They were like the dreamer around that. For me, I just looked at it, with the knowledge I had from Feynman, and I just looked into the fact that earthquake is not a studied science. And I'm like, well, chaos theory, something, something, something. And then with chaos theory, I came with my own ideas. And one of the people we pitched to got, lost all his melanin in front of my face when I told him, wait a second, we can interfere in the chaotic, which by the way, we cannot perfectly. And I'm going to address that in another video. I addressed it with the heartbeat thing, but I think I didn't air that episode. But this is basically that we can interfere in chaos systems to regulate them and thus prevent earthquakes. And so that guy got white on me. I know that there are certain elections around triangular shapes of astrology, kind of. I think it's more the T-squares than the bisextiles, and the release from the T-square. There are great astrologers that tend to that. There's a Dutch guy that tended to that, and there's another. There is Trifon, and there is the talismans person, the one that turns old coins into talismans. Wait a second. And he looked into that as well. I was thinking to look into that, but I didn't have like the statistic background. And then when I saw that the interventions, like it took me to the sadness stories and how the ritual abuse coincides with the fact that right now we don't have Tesla energy, Nikola Tesla's energy, for free, because we would really need to obliterate ritual sacrifice. And during 7th of October, I tended to a study of like calling, let's say, Beta per se, using hibiscus, and learning from Africans that switched blood sacrifice to things that are actually ethical and even vegan. Sphere and Sundry cannot be ignored, mentioning that maybe it was not her original intention. Bless you. Okay, my mom sneezed on that. But a byproduct of her having to adapt to a sector of marketing talismans for people, create a situation where she wanted to make them vegan and so on, and that basically created poppy seeds for moon talisman. And yeah, if people have like other things to say, Like I said, if people work with MK often, they will have to transmute that before 2060s, the 2060s, particularly for those that want to maintain their legacy as occultists or magicians. And not end up in being known as like the female Aleister Crowley or something. So I'm the one astrologer that tends to that. And then um, and usually when one tends to that, people begin to slowly recognize that they also have to tend to that, and that creates a revolution. Uh, Uranus retrograde in my 10th house with Ketu, okay, having a non-attachment to career and legacy it creates a megalithic one. By chance, it just happened. Um, Now, when did he invent the Tesla? The three-phase thingy. And by the way, the dark occultists still use that. He had depression after his work and endeavors did not succeed. So for those people that have their innovations, I'm probably going to do a series about that, because many people had so many innovations and they became targeted individuals because of that. And here 24, that would be around his Uranus square. And okay, was reading books, but then what was there to read? Faust by Goethe, and my Pluto square was finding out that Faust was a documentary. The engine, the induction engine. Ooh, which will change the entire world. Okay. Induction concluding from the rule to the expansion of the rule. Deduction concluding from a system to the core rule. And it still works on the principle of axiomatic mathematics, which I think is one of the things that created a lot of supposed predictability, but a lot of political assassinations, because there's just something about that, the logic or the tautologic in that Feynman talked about that, where it's antithetical to scientific evolution. And this is also why we have delays and bubble pops around science. It's challenging to explain my intuition. I need to take a look at the chart when I have such intuitions. You see, looking at Tesla's chart, at Nikola Tesla's chart, of course, breeds intuitions. The moon approaching Rahu, still a moon hour. Ascendant on my lot of fortune. Okay, so it was fated for me to make that prediction, Saturn prediction, into the past and into the future, dual time. Okay, okay. When talk about changing the future is changing the past, because there is choices of timelines to change the history. If we can pull up from history, you see, we can pull up from history all the feminist women that ever made a scientific contribution, all the oppression of women along history, and so on and so forth. There are many various timelines, and when we pull a thread, we basically shape the perspective of history. But there's also an actual change in time itself, and its manifestation into the past that creates, and I kind of feel like CERN has to do with that. Oh, Venus is 23 degrees. Venus came out of the 22. A lot of fortune with Uranus Sedna. So scientific eurekas, and also eurekas as to why don't we apply Nikola Tesla's energy yet? Well, the world needs to stop raping children if it wants free energy. I mean, well, duh. It's kind of like obvious, and I'm not saying that from a moral point of view, but from a scientific point of view. That would probably need a series of episodes to explain that intuition. But that would be the Uranus square. Okay, when Tesla invented the three-phase generator. Wireless, again, wireless is yin, and they cloned hermaphrodites, and I think the cloning project missed the yin. They tried to create yin technologically, and they were quite effective doing that, to be very honest. But unfortunately, they were also torturous in feeding the lower astrals a lot of things, and I really don't know about the different streams because they were probably antithetical streams. Maybe there is I think probably there was this lady that talked, and why is it trying to be, come on. I will have to look at Gigi Young's page. There was this lady, I want to call her Bratislava, I don't know why. How many attempts to block the frequency when I tried to talk about that? Rudolf Steiner, and then there was this lady that was this Rudolf Steiner, and then there was the revision. No, I will need to, because I did her charts, but I didn't post it. I did Rudolf Steiner chart and did it post it as well. I think there were streams of thinkers that were beginning to emerge from the ritual abuse that they had undergone, and that's how we got Rudolf Steiner's thinking. Okay, because he came from the cloning project, and yes, if they try to do it on natural birthing babies, one could consider that maybe there was such experiments on me, but this is relevant to so many infants because I was born natural birth, but definitely the connection to I don't believe that people who are born cloned are like soulless. None of that. It's about whether a person is tortured or not. And I think there was some sort of experiment with my generation to try to create the from afar type of rituals, or to summon a certain, like, who would I be a spiritual clone of? I don't know. But this is probably leading to the 2050s when Aries will ingress into Venus sign, just like they explored the men trying to birth and clone men without women, which in the reality or in the praxis was an incredibly cruel way of actually deriving wombs from girls, young girls, by torture, and that's to keep the cloned, to keep the people who progress the science mind control. That is basically now each and every one of us in our own way is deprogramming. So, and that is the scientific evolution, and this is why kind of like humanity needs to progress, because humanity is kind of like under the exposure of what they see from the mockingbirds. So Rudolf Steiner was very close to transcending that, and then people could only talk within the Christ consciousness or whatnot. Um, and I don't resist the term Christ consciousness. I just think that to refine and purify it more, it's not necessarily by one name or another of a god or a man. And it doesn't mean that I'm a naturalist in that sense, okay? It's just something that I can't explain yet. Um, okay, so there's the radio 1893. Tesla preceded Marconi with invention of radio. Um, and again, wave-based technology. And those were the trajectories of the conjunction. It was still within the Pluto-Neptune conjunction and co-presence in the same sign, even probably when those inventions came about. If I think about Pluto-Neptune, we are still within the sextile, so there's a lot of reckoning, a lot of spiritual, psychological innovations and insights and philosophical ones. It's the century where people really did think about reunification of spirit and matter, not into a partisan. And yes, there is a non-dual sense to that that can be accessed without torture. In fact, the information is more coherent when it's accessed without torture. And I may have channeled people, so I don't know who. Um, 1894. So this was the real wireless energy, and this happens in 1896. Again, 1890s, we have the conjunction, okay, and that would be that would be Tesla. So note how the Neptune-Pluto cycles are coming about. Röntgen, Röntgen to Tesla in 1901, which is it's kind of like the 1901. I would consider it the frequency foreplay to the bisextile, to the sextile, uh, where we and it begins with a waveform, Röntgen, um, laser focused, which is a good time to treat my toenail with soft laser. Um, yes, but this also, if we think about, oh, why don't we have free energy? Oh, the economical interest, the this, the that. They are all built on one thing and one thing only. Centuries of people saying the Me Too went too far. Even Rockefeller, okay, gave rights to women. It was like, I can tax women. Women are human. Let's tax them. It's no problem. Women got the right to vote, to open a bank account. When it came to sexual sovereignty, even then, the Rockefeller would just adapt to what works. It's a centuries upon centuries of people saying, oh my God, rights to women. Oh my God, not to rape women. Oh my God, not to rape little boys and girls. Then you don't get to enjoy free energy. That just makes sense. You don't align with the frequency of those inventions. The neon lights. And looking at Tesla's chart, we can see how the outer planets agreement and the discussion of the outer planets that wasn't even fully there in the chart accumulated to the times where he would invent the inventions that came about. Now, if we think about the previous conversations that we had within the age of the Pluto Neptune sextile, there were the ingresses, of course. There was well, for me it would just be Pluto going over my midheaven, and that no, because it is such a but you know what, Pluto going through the galactic center, which would be um, the end of the 2000s, the mid to end 2000s. That was Pluto going through the galactic center. The Uranus-Neptune conjunction in Aquarius. I don't know when was Uranus. Let's take a look at that. Because this is actually important. Okay. Aspects and transits. And that would be Uranus conjoining Neptune. The Uranus-Pluto we know we had during the 60s. Okay, that's the Pluto Virgos. And the Uranus-Neptune. So let's take a look at the conjunction. The Uranus-Virgos gave us chaos theory in the open. Okay, it was there since Tesla, but they gave us chaos theory and the application to the heart, the thing that regulates the heart, which I said with the Uranus of Uranus Sag, which is my generation, and now the Uranus Gemini. It's a square to that invention, so there can be adjustments and refinements needing to be in that heart regulator. Okay, just it's not a jab, it's science. Okay. Um, so Neptune, Uranus. They won't conjoin in the near century. So let's go back to the 19th century, because it's pretty recent. We had something 1993.